So everything will work, once again, if you unplug it for a few minutes, including yourself. Now, this is from Anne Lamott. And in my experience, that's been true, particularly with technology. Your cell phone gets hung up, right? What do? Turn it off and restart it. Your computer gets slow or hung up or whatever. The tech ends up saying, reboot. Have you rebooted? Right? 17 times, but I'll try it again. And it does usually eventually come back. There's something about calming those circuits down and allowing them to refresh themselves that lets them start over. And the same is true for you and me. Unplugging, turning it off for just a few minutes every day to allow us to calm our circuits, to restore, reset ourselves. Reading this book of the month, The Joy Plan, has reminded me of some basic ideas and practices that I've allowed to take a back seat a little bit in my life in the last year. It's been a busy year for me, and a lot of things have happened in my life, and it's been busy here at the center, and I got married and had a big wedding that happened and all that, and then ran off on a honeymoon for a while, and other travels and things that have happened personally, and it's just been a busy year. And while all of that is joyful and happy from the outside, there is that underlying sense of joy that is our divine nature of who and what we are, that we can sometimes get distracted from by all of the stuff on the outside, be that the positive or the negative. And again, reading this book has brought this back to me, and I want to share some of that with you today and discover how we can all maybe move from stressed to blessed during this holiday season. Does that sound good? I want to do a baseline check, though. Has anybody ever experienced stress? A couple. Okay, all right. So I'm not alone in this. Just want to make sure. I want to bore the rest of you, okay? So most of us do from time to time. And sometimes we have specific triggers and responses, don't we? Holidays can do that for us, can't they? I know it's going to happen. And sometimes they're random. We may be surprised by them. Why this is making me feel so stressed? And maybe during the holiday time it is visiting family. Maybe that's a trigger for you that you know is stressful, is visiting family, in-laws or outlaws, whatever they might be. Or maybe it's travel. Travel can be stressful, the airports, the TSA, the baggage, the airlines. And maybe it's shopping for the perfect gift. Or maybe it's the financial stress of shopping at all. Maybe it's decorating. Maybe it's preparing to entertain or going to folks' homes for entertainment. Whatever that might be. And maybe it's the stress of being alone, away from family, away from friends. Not everybody enjoys the holidays, do they? Not everyone looks forward in joy to experiencing the holidays. And that idea reminds me of that movie called It's a Wonderful Life. Familiar with that one? Yeah, it's become sort of a holiday classic, hasn't it? With Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed playing in that. It's a wonderful show, and it's the story of George Bailey. If you haven't seen it this year yet, maybe just recalling the story. It's about George Bailey, and it starts out with him as a young man, and he's full of dreams and ideas, and he's going to go off to the big city and make his mark in the world. And circumstances change, and he chooses, out of obligation, a felt obligation, to stay in his hometown and to go to work for the family savings and loan. And time passes, he marries his high school sweetheart, they have children, etc. And he's running the savings and loan, and his somewhat scattered uncle is working with him, and there's a problem that happens. The uncle loses some money. And so the town finds out about it, and George is frantic. The bank has a run on it. There's not enough money to give everybody, and it's just a bad situation. Everybody in town's mad at him. So he feels the distress, and what do you think he does? He goes to the bar and he gets drunk, right? That's the best solution. Just go to the bar and get drunk. And then he decides he's got a better idea. He's going to go jump off the bridge into the frozen river and kill himself. Now, that's a brilliant idea. Well, as he's standing there, who shows up? his little guardian angel, Clarence. And he and Clarence saves him, and he comes back in, and they're chatting, and George makes a comment. He says, "It'd be better off if I wasn't born." And Clarence says, "Really?" So through a little magic of his own, Clarence shows George what life in the small town would have been like had George not been born. And so George is glad he is born now that he sees how negative life would have been for everybody in town had he not been born. And he goes back home and has a lovely Christmas. Clarence gets his wings, and everybody lives happily ever after. Hope I didn't spoil it for anybody, but that's the gist of the story, right? It is a good show. You should watch it. You should watch it. There's a lot of fun stuff that happens in it. But it does show us how the holidays can leave us feeling a little like George. A little overwhelmed by family obligations. Why do I have to go there again? It doesn't bring me joy. Or maybe it's some other obligation that we're feeling, a sense of responsibility to others, our community, our friends, the shopping, the decorating, whatever that obligation might be that you have a feeling about. And it can leave us feeling overbusy, overstressed, unjoyful, and just maybe downright joyless. But rather than jump off the bridge, we might have our very own Clarence. As I mentioned, that I've sometimes allowed joy to get buried under the busyness and burdens. And the joy plan is helping me realize that I can excavate that back up, because it is my divine nature. It is my true nature of who I am, is to be joy, because we are divine manifestations of spirit, which is joy. It's pure positive joy. And so we are that which it is. So of course we have this. Some have and express more of it than others, but we all have it. So we can excavate this to a greater expression in our lives. The science of mind defines joy as the emotion excited by the expectancy of good, gladness, delight, exultation. Sounds yummy, doesn't it? Sounds yummy. And we were talking in study group about our book, how the author was starting from a very, very, very low point in her life. That she didn't have a lot of pure positive thinking going on at that time. She just lost her business. She was feeling like a complete failure, and life just wasn't going her way. But she decided to make a commitment for 30 days to joy. And so we go through with her in these introductory chapters how she really bootstrapped herself up from such negative thoughts, negative thinking, into a more positive way of thinking. Now, most of us that have been attending Science of Mind churches for any time have a toolbox full of practices and tools that we can use to help assist us when we experience that negative thinking, don't we? We've got those that we can lean into. We can lean into our practitioners and ministers here for support in prayer and counseling and so forth. So we have that toolbox available to us. But sometimes, like I say, it can get buried, can it? Sometimes it can get buried. We can forget where we placed our toolbox. I know it's around here someplace, right? I know it's around here someplace. So she shares a comment in the book from a psychologist friend of hers that I thought kind of summed up the science of mind, actually. He said to her, "We project our thoughts through words and actions, and that's how we create our lives." It's kind of profound, isn't it? We project our thoughts through words and actions, and that's how we create our lives. Our experience of life is shaped by what we say about it. How do you talk about your life? Do you talk about how wonderful your life is, or do you complain about the things that you don't like in your life? It's a difference in perspective, isn't it? And if what he says is true, and I believe it might be, then we can change our lives by changing how we talk about our lives, can't we? Yeah. And we can do that by changing our perspective. And that's really what we're talking about in moving from stressed to blessed, is changing our perspective of how we see everything around us and how we experience that. Ernest Holmes, the founder of Centers for Spiritual Living and the author of The Science of Mind that we teach from, says, "No living soul can contribute one iota of happiness or peace or health or joy to your life and no living soul can take it away. Only as you allow it to flow through your consciousness. Again, it's in how we interpret it through our consciousness. Everything we experience, how we interpret that, defines the experience that we're going to have. And we've shared before, we've all had the experience of two people standing side by side, having the same experience or interaction, and having completely different interpretations of that. One gets angry and one might cry. One gets angry and one laughs about it. How can that be if this is not a true statement? We all interpret it through our own consciousness, our own perspectives. We can blame everything that we don't like about our life on something outside of ourselves, can't we? It's easier, isn't it? That is why I feel bad. That is why I'm not happy. That is why this is not working in my life. If that would change, then I could be happy. It's that fantasy thinking, isn't it? Anybody else have that fantasy thought? Gosh, if you just change your behavior, then I could be happy. Has it worked for anybody? No, it doesn't work, does it? It doesn't work. All we can change is our own thinking about what's happening. And that's exactly what our author in this book did in her 30-day joy program, was begin to change how she looked at everything in life. She began to change her thinking. Heard that before? I think so. I think we've heard that before. It is what we think about everything that happens in our lives that creates the reality that we experience. That's a power, isn't it? That each and every one of us has to change our lives in a moment and how we interpret and experience. Back to our movie. George was thinking, saying, and taking actions that his life was awful. And it led him down a path, didn't it? My life is awful. I have to go change my reality by infusing a lot of alcohol. And then he had a better idea. I have to change everything for everybody else and make everybody else's life better because I can't stand this anymore, and jump off this bridge. Those were the actions that his I'm awful, my life is awful, thinking, how he was defining his life, that's where it was leading him. That's where it was leading him. Until he had a shift in his perspective and how he looked at his life and decided his life was wonderful. It's a wonderful life. We can do that also. We all have our own clearance. Did you know you have a clearance? We all have our own clearance. It is the power of our imagination. It is the power of our imagination. That is the most creative faculty that any of us have. It is the source of all that is. You've all heard my story. This music stand existed as an idea in someone's mind, as a thought. It was imagined before it ever got manufactured. It's the same with the chairs. It's the same with the microphone. It's the same with everything. It was first a thought before it ever got drawn, before it ever got manufactured and created. And that is the power of our imagination. We've been hearing for the past couple of years, we've been talking more about the power of visualization and using this power of our imagination to visualize that which it is, the life that we would like to experience. That is the power of this thing we have called imagination. In the Joy Plan, she encourages us to seek out the silver lining in everything. Anybody heard that growing up as a kid? There's got to be a silver lining. And it can sound Pollyanna-ish, I know, but if it makes you feel better, isn't that okay? Isn't that okay? Look for the silver lining. What is the good in this? What could be the good in this? What if I interpreted this a little bit differently? Could I feel better about it? She suggests that when we find ourselves worrying or focused on an unpleasant or stressful or overwhelming feeling, instead of serving it tea, have you heard that saying, the Buddhist monk Suzuki said? He says, let the thought pass through. Don't serve it tea. Don't build a tent. Don't build a village, right there. Let it pass through. Let it pass through. It's a better way to overcome that fantasy thinking, is to let it pass. Ernest Holmes tells us that we can erase a negative thought from consciousness by pouring in an opposite thought. This thought meets and neutralizes the other neutralizes the other effect. It rubs it out just like a whiteboard. Anybody used a dry erase marker on a whiteboard? It just erases right. You can use your finger and erase it off, can't you? Yeah. Some of us use a Sharpie. You ever try to get a Sharpie off, a permanent marker off a whiteboard? That doesn't happen very easily, does it? And sometimes our thinking gets ingrained like that, where we have those permanent markers written on a whiteboard instead of the erasable dry erase markers. And we want to hold on to those thoughts a little more tightly. Imagine a glass of dirty water and an eyedropper of clean water, and you just keep dropping those drops in there. It's going to take a while, but over time, the water's going to get clear, isn't it? Because it displaces. It's going to displace, and the clean water's going to take over. And that's the same idea, that the positive thoughts will take over if we continue to think them. If we continue to think them. It's why our affirmations work. And brain science is proving this today for my brainiacs. Brain science is proving this. What they're telling us about neuroplasticity and the neural networks that we have is that they can now see on EEGs, I think it is, that our thoughts begin to clump together. Our thoughts begin to clump together. So when we consistently think a thought, negative or positive, consistently think a thought, we're going to form these clumps or clusters of neurons and form neural networks in our thinking. Again, that's why affirmations work. It's also why worry works, right? It's also why that negative worry will draw things into our lives. Kaya tells us in the book, when we think thoughts and feel an emotion about one subject, our brains will seek to connect similar thoughts and emotional responses from other areas of our lives as well. You ever had one of those things where you thought someone was maybe not a nice person, and then everything they did, you interpreted as being something suspicious, something not nice? It's your brain attracting all those thoughts to prove up your truth and prove up your reality. Fascinating, isn't it? And imagine just shifting that around and seeing the good, seeing the God, seeing the divine, and allowing those thoughts to begin to cluster and form the new neural network in your mind. What a more positive and uplifting and joyful experience that we would have. And then there's more good news on brain science. They have now told us, now proved, that our thoughts regulate the level of stress that we experience. Do you believe that? Yeah. We can. My mother used to say, you're working yourself up into a tizzy, right? And that's our minds working us up into stress, working us into a tizzy. And that's what they're telling us it can do. The airlines, TSA, when we're getting ready to go through, are you stressed out? Have you worked yourself up before you even get there? I have a friend that does that, that's all worked up before they even get there, just knowing they're going to get them. And it's like, I don't really believe every TSA officer wakes up in the morning and goes, how can I make every traveler in the airlines today miserable? I don't believe that. Do you? No. I think they wake up with a goal to make airline travel safe. I think that's really their goal. But we again can approach that from the standpoint of, well, search everybody else, but don't search me. I'm okay. Fantasy thinking, right? And it doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve us. If we can approach that line with gratitude, imagine your joy in walking through that as opposed to your angst. Kaya tells a story in the book about traveling, and they're at the airport, and their luggage went to the wrong place. And it got taken off and stored someplace, and they were delayed and all this, that, and the other. She had 2 little children with her. And she said, we just sat down and had a picnic on the food that we had brought on the plane with us, and it was fine. The girls enjoyed it. It was fun. Imagine that, instead of stomping your feet and fretting and fussing at every airline employee who can't do anything about it, right? A totally different experience, and the example that she set for those children. Isn't that nice? It's a very wonderful example. So we know about the mind-body connection. We know the power of our thoughts. Scientific studies do tell us that the more optimistic and positive our thoughts, the less stress we have. They also say that optimistic people are happier, more creative, faster at problem solving, with increased mental alertness. That sounds like a prescription for joy and good health, doesn't it? Yeah. Don't worry, be happy. So let's move from stress to blessed and look for joy in every moment. I think that's the best holiday gift we can give ourselves, our family, and our community, is moving ourselves out of that stress into being blessed. And again, the simple truth that Science of Mind teaches is change your thinking, change your life. And that's what we're talking about this morning. So let's move into our practicing the principles and see how we might be able to experience some more joy this week. I've got 3 practices for us today. And the first one is based on that first quote that we opened up with. Reboot your brain. Reboot your brain. Every day, take time to unplug, even if it's 5 minutes, just to stop and to take a moment to reset, calm, and find 5 things that you're grateful for. 5 things you're grateful for. And count them on one hand so you can keep up with them, right? 5 things you're grateful for. And then smile. Smile. Science, again, is telling us that our brains don't really know the difference. It does know some difference, but when we smile, it activates something within us that changes how our brains are working. There's some chemical release or something. So try it. Everybody smile really, really big. Your whole face lights up. Your whole face lights up. Don't you feel better? Yeah, it's a little magic trick. So try that. And gratitude, of course, is the fastest route from stress to blessed. And then, of course, you can return to the chaos if you need to. But we practiced a lot of gratitude last month. Number 2, great question that the author asks is, does this feel good? Does what is happening right now, what I'm doing right now, what I'm thinking right now, does this feel good? And if it does, or am I allowing my point of view about it to make me unhappy? How's that for a follow-up question? Am I allowing my point of view about it to make me unhappy? If it doesn't feel good, the next question is, what would I prefer instead? What would I prefer instead? Science of Mind tells us in treatment we turn entirely away from the condition because as long as we look at it, we cannot overcome it. By thinking about it, we animate it with the power of our thought. Anybody watch Star Trek? Remember tractor beams? I think it was in Star Trek with tractor beams. That's what we're doing when we're focusing on those things we don't want or like in our life. It's like, okay, I'm going to keep an eye on you because I don't like you. I don't want you in my life, and there you are. And it's like a tractor beam that we hold on to instead of putting our energy on that which it is that we would like to experience and letting this fall away from neglect and holding on to that which it is that we would prefer to experience more of. Again, changing that thinking. So ask this week, does it feel good? And if the answer is no, ask what would feel better and focus on that. The author was very clear in the book because she shared this with her husband and he goes, great, I'm going to drink beer and watch football. That feels better. And she says, no. It's not about just the hedonistic side of, making ourselves feel good about those types of things. It is about changing what we think about what is. Remember last month, Dr. John DeMartini suggested that we were grateful for what is as it is? Whatever is happening in the world, I'm not saying that we can change every little thing. All we can change is how we perceive it, how we think about it, what meaning we give it to ourselves. So changing what we think about it and being great. What is, that's what is. That's what is. How can I look at it differently? How can I look at it differently? And number 3, breathe. Breathe. Turns out that deep breathing is a great countermeasure to stress. when you feel stress beginning, whether it's a physical beginning for you, your shoulders come up, or you feel tension starting, or your thoughts begin to get agitated, or your breathing gets shallow, maybe you perspire, whatever it is, if you feel that stress is coming on within you, pause and take 10 deep breaths. 10. 10. Not panting, right? Because we pant when we get stressed sometimes. 10 nice, deep, slow breaths. That floods our brain with oxygen, floods our bodies with oxygen. And it triggers the amygdala to turn off that internal fight, flight, or freeze reaction that we're all programmed with, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. Because when we get stressed, that's the automatic response that happens in our brains. But we have the power to turn it off simply through our breathing, through flooding our brain with more oxygen. So take a deep breath. Let's do another one. One more. Feel it? You can begin to feel that lightness, can't you? Just with 3. Imagine pausing for 10. Imagine pausing for 10. Yeah. So I invite you to try all 3 of these this week. Reboot, unplug yourself, take a few moments and be grateful. Does it feel good, and what would feel better? And breathe. And breathe. I want to close this out today with a poem by Christian D. Larson. Christian D. Larson was around at the turn of the century and beyond, and Ernest Holmes studied his work early on in his exploration, and in fact was so inspired by his writing, or his writings, that he abandoned his studies, which happened to be with Mary Baker Eddy and Christian Science. And Ernest was more enthralled with Larson's work than Mary Baker Eddy, so he left that side and went with Larson's studies. Then in 1918, when Ernest started the Science of Mind magazine, he invited Larson to join the Science of Mind as an associate editor and a contributor to the magazine, where he was for many, many years. And then he was also put on permanent faculty at the Ernest Holmes Institute of Religious Science as a teacher. So Larson and Holmes had a very dynamic relationship. But you may have heard of this poem. It's been around for many, many, many years. It's called The Optimist Creed. And I thought that was a nice finish for us today. He says, promise yourself to be so strong that nothing can disturb your peace of mind, to talk health, happiness, and prosperity to every person you meet, to make all your friends feel that there is something special in them, to look at the sunny side of everything and make your optimism come true, to think only the best, to work for only the best, and to expect only the best. To be just as enthusiastic about the success of others as you are about your own. To forget the mistakes of the past and press on to the greater achievements of the future. To wear a cheerful countenance at all times and give every living creature a smile that you meet. To give so much time to the improvement of yourself that you have no time to criticize others. And to be too large for worry, too noble for anger, too strong for fear, and too happy to permit the presence of trouble. So thank you for being with us today. You are all such a blessing to me and to this community. I am so grateful that you're here. Thank you. So would you join me for a prayer? So as we move within, into that stillness within us, taking that breath, and recognizing that that is the breath of God, that is life itself, moving in through and as our bodies, sustaining us. And as we recognize that that is all that there is. There's life, there's God, there's source, presence, love, harmony, balance. and joy. And all of that is here now, present in, through, and as me as an expression of it. And I know that it's here, present in, through, and as each of us, everyone in this room. For as I've said, there's no place that God is not. It's all right here. There's no separation whatsoever in the divine. There is one. And so from that oneness, from that wholeness, I speak my word for and about each of us, knowing, claiming, and accepting the abundant joy in our lives this holiday, holy day season, as we move through this last waning days of darkness and begin to move back into the light again as the days begin to get longer, the sun returns, light returns, warmth returns to our planet. I know that we are each blessed with a joyful holiday season, with all of the gifts of life, the goodness of life flowing to and through us in abundance. And I know for anyone that has anything on their heart today, that whatever it is lifted into this space of prayer this day, knowing that it is wrapped in this consciousness of healing, of wholeness, of health, of prosperity, that whatever needs to be clarified and answered is done so in this moment, that healing is revealed, whatever it might be. And I am grateful for that healing. I'm grateful for the revelation. I'm grateful for the manifestation. As I release this into the action of law, the activity of mind, I know that it's done, for it is already done in the mind of God. We simply await its manifestation in form. And we affirm this truth together by saying, and so it is.